feelings, depending on the direction of the eyes. Anyway, long story short, color theory. You have to understand color theory. You, as a podcaster, you use red and white in your thumbnails. I'm sure it's intentional. It's a classic marketing. If anybody studies marketing. So I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, raised in Fall River. And then later in my life, I moved, my early adulthood, I moved to Boston, lived in Boston for over a decade, then moved to California. So, I come from an area where specifically Fall River, 50 miles south of Boston, there's not a lot of universities. Education isn't that great. There's high school dropout rates. There was major problems with heroin back in the day. Everyone's depressed. I grew up in the hood. I grew up across the street from a housing project. I've seen a lot of stuff already in my teenage years that most people won't see in a lifetime, and experience these things. And most of the people I grew up with never leave the neighborhood. When I moved to Boston, it was a big deal. He's going 50 miles south to the big city. And I use that opportunity because I didn't go to college to ear hustle. I would go sit at the cafe outside of Harvard and listen to what all the students and teachers were saying. That's how I developed and learn. I self-taught myself. When I graduated high school, I didn't know how to tell time on a regular clock. I needed digital. I had never read a full book all the way through. And I didn't know my months in the order: January, February, March, April, May, June, July. I didn't know any of that. At
the end of high school.
Yeah. A lot of people dropped out in high school. There was, there was a lot. How'd I get through it? I don't know. Must have cheated my way. Maybe I wasn't in class the day they went over that. But it's not that I didn't have the intellectual capacity to learn. I was a product of the environment, and I was a product of that school system.
What were your parents around?
I had two parents. They're great parents. It was just the environment we lived in. In fact, they moved us out I had an older brother, and he got into a lot of trouble. And later in life, they moved us out to the suburb.
Were they working a lot, your parents too?
That's the thing. They were working 24/7. My mom and my dad,
Putting food on the table.
Putting food on the table. Yeah. So
Respect.
I was actually back then they would refer, if we're talking about classism, they would refer to it as lower middle class. And being that, I was the wealthiest kid on the block because I actually had toys. My parents bought me Star Wars figures and G.I. Joe figures and stuff. None of the other kids in my neighborhood had that, so they'd all flock to my house because I was the rich kid. But we weren't really rich. We were just getting by. I didn't even have money to get into university. I was that ignorant. I didn't even know how to get into college, and I didn't want to. Back then, especially where I grew up, it wasn't cool to read. You're a geek if you read. What are you reading for? It wasn't until my 20s that I realized all of that was backwards, and that I had, this ignorant sense about things. I wanted to expand my consciousness. And when I got to Boston and I started meeting educated people who were going to university, then when I started traveling through the music industry, and you get to California and you're around all the, the hippies and higher consciousness, then you start traveling the world and you see how different cultures operate. It just expands your consciousness. And that was what the journey was like for me, moving from south of Boston into Boston proper, and then over to California.
But you said, and we're weaving around here. We're going to come back to Rosicrucianism at some point because we were on it. But you had also said that you initially got interested in the esoteric or ancient history topics literally through hip hop, and hearing that in high school. Who'd you say it was KSR?
KRS-One. Blastmaster KRS-One would rap about metaphysics. And that's why I went on a tangent about Kemet, because he was the first one to rap about, use the word Kemet in a rap. What's Kemet? Egypt? I knew Egypt.
And you couldn't Google back then.
There was no
90s.
Google. There was no YouTube. So
what are you
books.
doing?
Eventually, it's books. You carry that with you. And then later, I became a book geek. I'm a voracious reader. I've got stacks of books on the side of the toilet. I've got books by my bed. I've got books in every room of my house. People will often criticize me because I'm always wearing sunglasses. What do you think? You're cool? No, it's because I've got what I call scholar eye, bags under my eyes from being up till 3, 4 a.m. reading.
I'm going to use that.
Scholar eyes.
Okay.
And then you just hide them with the sunglasses.
Yeah, that's right.
So, which is a trick from the music industry. Oh, your eyes look like shit. Put these sunglasses on and get in the video.
Oh, wow.
There's so much that goes on in the music industry. It was as a CEO of a record label, it was a prerequisite to read the 48 Laws of Power.
Robert Greene.
To study neuro-linguistic programming, color theory, eye accessing cues. You know what eye accessing cues are?
Eye accessing cues.
It's a part of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and it's been employed, experimented, CIA and FBI. basically, and I used to use it all the time in the music industry. You're doing interviews with artists and you're in the boardroom. You have to know how to read people, not just their words. So eye accessing cues, your eyes move. They access different parts. It's
like
somewhat
up,
speculative,
down, side.
right?
Yeah.
So the upper part is, either creative. One side is for creative. So our the right side is for creative.
Yep.
The left side is for remembered. So this is how you can tell if somebody's lying. Usually, it's not 100% accurate science.
Yeah.
But in most cases, I can watch the pattern of your eyes, and I can ask you a story. I can say, Julian, what does a purple elephant with pink dots look like? Now you're aware of it, and so your eyes may not move now, but typically,
you're actually asking me right now.
Well, see, you're not even aware.
Okay.
But if I ask you a question that requires you to think, you're going to access a part of your brain to either pull it from memory or you're going to create it. If you're lying, you're creating.
Yes.
Not always, but if you're lying, you have to create something. So if your eyes don't go to the left side, which shows me you're remembering, now I know you're creating. So it's possible you be maybe fabricating a story, and you can access thoughts, feelings, depending on the direction of the eyes. Anyway, long story short, color theory. You have to understand color theory. You, as a podcaster, you use red and white in your thumbnails. I'm sure it's intentional. It's a classic marketing. If anybody studies marketing, color theory, red is an impulse color. You've got the red curtain. It's symbolic, and it actually affects us physiologically, psychologically, which then affects us physiologically, because it's why
I can't take credit for those. My mom got those, but yeah, you're right.
I thought you were just trying to emulate Joe Rogan with the red curtain.
Oh, don't even get me fucking started, bro. So she when I was in the old studio in my parents' house, if you look like pre-episode 50, I had just to set up like false background or whatever, and my mom couldn't keep looking at it, and she's like, "I am going to get you curtains." I'm like, no, I can't afford them. No, I'm getting them. I'm like, if you insist. So she goes and gets curtains before episode 50 with Riley Horvath. And I remember the day they got there and we were putting them in, he opened up the new studio with red curtains. And I was like, oh no. And I'm like, fuck. And my mom's like, no one's going to care. I'm like, oh, you don't know the internet, Jesus Christ. But I'm like, well, all right, we'll see. No one bothered me about it for 2.5 years there, or 3 years more at the studio. Then we come here. Danny Jones flies up here with me to design the studio. And he's like, yeah, just put the curtains on this side, whatever. You'll be on that side. I'm like, okay, great. And then the first day, oh, are you Joe Rogan with your curtains? I'm like, oh, yeah, because Joe Rogan invented fucking red curtains. Oh, dude, that is such a pain point for me. I'm like, Jesus Christ. We got to get on with life here. But
I don't know. I seen Rogan do it. I seen Julian Dorey do it. I'm like, if all the great podcasters are doing it, I'm going to need to get a red curtain for my content now. But what I was saying about the color red, and this whole idea of we have to, it's not just music. You have to study people. It's psychology. You're studying psychology and human behavioral patterns when you're in the music industry if you want to be successful. And red, Target stores, Stop and Shop markets, it's an impulse color. When you go to check out in any store and you've got all your candy bars, how many of them have a red wrapper with white? Why do marketing people, a lot of thumbnails, red on white? Because that color red does something to us.
Yes, it does.
Subconsciously. It triggers something. We're already conditioned to stop at a red stop sign, a red stoplight, without even reading the word stop. We see the color red. What it does, it triggers our fight or flight response. And then we get this impulse. And that's why red is the color of passion and love. And, but it's also a color that, has a physiological effect on us. And so why is it at the impulse items? Why the candy, right before you're checking out, remember you might want to buy a candy bar, which I don't recommend because it's all sugar and it's going to cause cancer. It's all poison. But, it's to get you to stop. Yes. Red is to get you, just like your thumbnails is to get you to stop and click. That's so right. we had to go through, color theory, human behavioral patterns, all of this stuff, neurolinguistic programming, read the 48 laws of power. And I don't agree with everything Robert Greene, but they're all founded on universal laws and principles of, and,
he
human
makes
behavioral
some good
patterns.
cases for sure.
He certainly does. So, but all of that goes into this whole dynamic of the music industry. And, there's a lot of fake stuff in the music industry, images. Back then you wanted to, the saying, fake it till you make it, or to be successful, one must project the image of success.
Yes.
That's what we were doing. So even if you didn't have the money And that's what the rappers are doing. Even if you don't have the success, you
Act like you do.
Act like you do it. And in some cases, when you be it, you'll eventually, like begets like, you'll eventually become it. So there is something to that. But at the same time, man, I found myself trying to keep up with the Kardashians. Literally, when I was making serious money in the music industry, every Saturday morning, I was going to Newbury Street in Boston to Riccardi, one of the most expensive stores, buying $2,000 leather belts imported from Italy, $3,000 sneakers, $10,000 jeans. No exaggeration.
$10,000 jeans?
5 to maybe 10. No, I'm not. I take that back. It'd be like $2,000 to $3,000 jeans. I would drop. I say 10. That number is in my head because I would go on a Saturday morning and drop 10 grand. Like every Saturday. When I was at the peak in the music industry, when I had money, I would go.
Because you felt like you had to.
Well, because one, I had the money and I don't come from money. So when you don't have money and you get money, you spend it foolishly. In hindsight, I wouldn't do these things now. I was much younger and more immature. You know, I don't even have a house now. I don't have the money I have anymore. That's all gone. You know, I'm just getting by now. But back then, you know, you had to keep up. Oh man, Kanye's got the freshest shit. I got to get on top of the game. I'm going to go to this event. They're all going to be there. I need to have the freshest shit, you know, so I got to spend the money, and that costs money. Absolutely. Oh, we've got an artist. We got to make him look successful. Like he's doing his thing. We got to put all the money into buying, you know, the clothes for the artist, but it's all fake and it's sick. And and then I realized like I was caught up unconsciously doing this. And then I realized I could be doing better things with my money, like traveling the world and pursuing my penchant for exploring ancient civilizations and indigenous traditions and the Western esoteric tradition, getting to the core of all the things that drive me. Because I was self-made. I had to read on my own. I had to educate myself on, how do you start a company? How do you build how do you do all of this stuff? And then you realize that as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you can relate, your company, your brand is only as good as you are.
That's 100%.
If you're sick, the show's got to go on, right? So,
that's right.
And that sickness can manifest not only physically, mentally, spiritually,
Absolutely.
Emotionally. You got to make sure all these things are in check so that your company is a reflection of you. So I would read all the books. I would go now I've transitioned from not reading, thinking reading's not cool, to go into Barnes and Nobles and buying every book on the shelf in the spiritual section or the self-help section or the business section, going through them all until they get to the point where the books on the shelf at Barnes and Nobles no longer serve you. And the world's, I've always had questions about religion that, my parents couldn't answer, the priest at Sunday school catechism couldn't answer, and then I grew up in a diverse, multicultural area. So, there are other people, there are Jewish kids, there were kids from India. And when you find out that they have different understandings of the afterlife or different traditions, you start to question your own. But it gets to a point where now I want to go to the root of the source. You see these guys behind me? What are they? They're gangsters.
Well, most of them. Yeah. Frank, halfway. Don Draper, context, I guess. The other one's pretty much, yeah.
Gangsters in the sense that they go to the source. Not necessarily that they're bodying people and leaving them in the ocean. See, a gangster is one who doesn't allow society or the government to govern him. A gangster is one who knows how to govern himself and go directly to the source. That's what makes them so powerful. They went to the source, they had the good stuff. You have to go to the gangster and, to get it or whatever. So my point is, like, I'm not a gangster in terms of bodying people and, burying someone, dropping them off with the fishes. And
good, because I'll put you in the fucking Meadowlands, pal.
Yeah. I'm in Jersey. Shout out Tony Soprano. No, but a gangster is someone who's going to go to the source. And spirituality, it's going to the source. Yeah. It's where did all this come from? What were the earliest texts that inspired Christianity? The Gnostic texts, the Hermetic texts, where do they come from? Oh, you start realizing, a lot of seems to come out of Egypt. The principles are already in Egypt.
So this sounds like, to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm just trying to follow along with the timeline of what you're describing. As you're from the 90s, graduating high school, going through the rest of the 90s, throughout the 2000s in the music industry, being really successful in that, getting caught up in some of the stuff you talked about in the music industry, keeping up with the Kardashians and shit like that. Like, you all along are getting more and more interested in your own exploration. And then at some point, snap, and you're like, I'm done with this music shit. I'm sick of it. I want to go do this. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.